Some conversations will be mind-blowing and you'll sit there and you'll have the most profound change.
Hello.
Hey Janice, I need to sort my sound out. Just give me a second.
No. Perfect. How are you?
All right, how are you?
I'm good. I think. I woke up this morning thinking, well, it's a bit chilly. I can hear a beach calling me somewhere. So I'm like, maybe it's time, but I'm trying to get my head around that as well. So who knows? Maybe it is time. Maybe it isn't time.
Maybe. Who knows?
Who knows? So the way that I normally do this is in a minute we'll just start. It's very organic. It's very me like, so it's just very organic, and the conversation will go wherever we go, as long as you're happy with that. And if you're not, you just say, no, I don't want to talk about that, and I'll go, yeah, okay. So before that though, everything is good with you? An interesting time of late, like everyone else?
Yeah, it has been an interesting time. I mean, I don't know if you've seen some of my posts. We've recently bought a house, and we had incompetent solicitors, we had a negligent surveyor, which we're all now trying to deal with. So there's quite a few practical problems I'm having to deal with, but I'm well in myself.
Cool. I did see the thing about someone trying to get your wife to pay some bills for some house.
Yeah, some water company just decided. Yeah. I know, honestly, in the last 3 or 4 months, it feels like we have experienced just a succession of negligence, incompetence, couldn't care less, crapness from various people.
Yeah, it's not great. And I think the thing is, a lot of these businesses, they literally, they don't care. They just want to hang something on somebody, and they just assume also that a lot of people won't actually fight them and won't kind of say, hold on a minute, you're taking the piss. Do you know what I mean? That people will just give in because they think they're authority or whatever it is. It's crazy, isn't it?
It is absolutely. So yeah, we've been dealing with a few what you might call stressful problems, but like I say, I can't complain about how I am. Cool. The problems just have to be dealt with.
Absolutely, it's just a matter of getting on with it. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go like that, and then we'll start. And my techie will take this bit out for us. So there you go. So, good morning, Steve. How are you?
Hi, Janice. Yes, I'm well, thank you. And you?
I'm good. We're bright and early recording this, ready for my 52 conversations. So if I miss a beat, it's because I've only had one coffee and I'm waiting for the second one. So before we go any further, rather than me saying who you are, or who you think you are, or who you act as being in this present form, do you want to tell people a little bit about who you are, and then we can kind of go into a conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Steve, obviously. We know each other through mutual interests in fields like NLP. Who am I? I guess it really depends on what I'm doing in the moment, to be honest. Obviously, in the context of this conversation, I am a coach who works with professional people who are a bit like me, people who worked in corporate world, people who are who basically like their work. They don't necessarily want to quit it, but they do experience it as stressful, and they would like to have a happier and more successful experience of that. So that's the kind of thing that I work with, and that's very much the where we have this combined interest in those schools of thought that deal with how we have happier and more successful experiences of our life and work.
Cool. So that's the worky bit. The bit of you that is your passion and your purpose outside of work, what fills you up? Because I know that if I'm on your timeline, there's music, there's films, and old buildings, architecture. So those are the things that fill you.
This is very true. I mean, I have always enjoyed escapist entertainment, and I think that probably traces back to the fact that when I was a boy, I grew up in a mining town. It was very dirty. It was very grimy. I've obviously got very fond feelings about the place because I grew up there. But as a boy, I kind of wanted escapism from all that. So I very much got into things like James Bond films because they were glamorous, and and Star Trek because it took me into outer space and all this kind of stuff. And that sort of nurtured this interest in movies. Now, obviously, as I grew older, I started to appreciate movies of a more interior nature. Things that were more about human beings and their emotions and their struggles and their triumphs in life. But yeah, that very much developed an interest in movies for me, and I developed a sideline interest in music from those movies, which then became very much a mainstream interest for me. So yeah, you'll often see me post about movie music and classic movies, and yeah, we like to go and see National Trust places and things like that as a way of relaxing.
I was going to say relaxing, and it's interesting because listening to you talk about the films and then the music, and it's escapism, right? But it's escapism in a really good, profound way. So how do you think it feeds into the rest of your days? What you get from those experiences?
Well, I think it has sort of come full circle in many ways, because it very much did start being about escapism. It started about being in these glamorous places or in outer space and having adventures and things like that. But as I say, as I got older, I started to appreciate films which were more about the human condition. I started to watch films like, for example, Midnight Cowboy, which is this very strange sort of love story between two guys who find who initially despise each other, but come to find that they need each other.
Yeah.
And I think what I get out of these kinds of movies is sometimes we can see something of a reflection of ourselves in the movie. Sometimes it simply is an activator for emotions which it's healthy to feel sometimes. I mean, it's quite healthy to be able to watch a scary movie and get caught up in that, but still know that there's not really a guy with an axe behind you.
I think sometimes it gives us permission, doesn't it? It gives us the permission to feel into those things and to lean into them. Whereas in our real world, in our real reality, we can go, no, I shouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. And if we look at the music side of it, I mean, I grew to like a particular branch of music, which you might call melancholic. It's not like really horribly depressive or anything, but there's a gentle sort of melancholia to it. And one of the things that I've learned over my time is that actually a peaceful melancholia is actually quite a nice release to some of those poisons of stress and distress. To actually let go for a bit and just allow yourself to be just a little bit melancholic.
Yeah,
can be really quite therapeutic.
Absolutely. I mean, music is a great thing. I found it. I'm super passionate about music across the genres. So when I was in Antigua and ending up with my Friday night radio show, I was like, wow, this is really exciting. I get to go and choose music and to talk about stuff that I really enjoy. How lucky am I? And then last year when my father died, I didn't listen to music for probably 8 weeks, 9 weeks. It was like the radio couldn't go on, and this is a person that has music on from across the genres every single day. And it wasn't until I was further along that experience that I thought, yeah, it's because actually there's a comfort in music for me. So whether it be joy, melancholy, memories, it actually evoked a certain state. And clearly I didn't want to be in that state. And I just think, from our points of view, the work that we do and the way that we look at humans and how we interact, it's really interesting to start picking those things apart sometimes to look at it on a deeper level. And then I actually made a conscious decision, okay, I'm going to play music. And at the point of making that conscious decision, I still hadn't worked out why I wasn't listening to music. And it was the same for reading. I love reading. I didn't want to read. The only thing that I wanted to do was keep moving. And I thought, oh yeah, there's something in there for you, Janice. Do you know what I mean? So interesting.
Absolutely. And I'm always fascinated by our inner knowing about what we want to do and what we don't want to do, and our ability to recognize when for some reason we don't want to do the things we would normally want to do.
Yeah. And it's kind of the learning journey, isn't it? So I think, collectively in our own ways, but very collectively, the last 19 months or so has been a massive journey for everybody, right? We've all been into places that we never thought we would experience, and things that are coming out of that. And one of the things that I've said, despite my own personal loss through that time, etc., I'm like, man, I've learned so much about myself that I didn't already know. So what's your experience of that for your journey?
Yeah, well, I absolutely resonate with that. And in actual fact, my journey it's been a little bit different for a lot of people through COVID and lockdown. I'm lucky enough that I didn't lose anybody close through COVID, which a lot of people did. And when we were all locked down at home, that wasn't as strange an experience for me as it was for a lot of people, because in actual fact, I'd been working from home for quite a long time before that, so I was already quite used to it. But that doesn't mean to say that I didn't have a journey, though, and to some extent, it was a journey about realizing how much connection you can easily take for granted, because it was so easy before to grab your mate and go and have a coffee. It was so easy before to get in the car and drive and visit somebody, and all of a sudden you couldn't do that. And so whilst I was quite comfortable being at home, I'm a natural introvert. When I want to refresh and renew, I tend to do it in solitude.
Yeah.
But even so, it felt weird not being able to just grab your mate and go for that coffee. So there's definitely a journey in there. And recently, I've actually been reading a book. I've actually been reading Darren Brown's book, A Book of Secrets. I actually find him quite an entertaining author with some interesting ideas.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about his journey in that. And as I was reading about his journey, I'm thinking this mirrors my journey.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so much to learn in everything, and I think we're always learning about ourselves. I think lockdown will have taught us a lot about ourselves. I think loss will teach us a lot about ourselves. Those small daily victories will teach us a lot about ourselves. Can I catalog exactly what I've learned? I'm not sure. That learning isn't always intellectual, as you know. Sometimes it's just an experiential learning that you can't describe in words.
Yeah, it's a vibrational thing, isn't it? I think a lot of it. Lots of people have been asked. So I came back to the UK at the end of April, beginning of May, because my daughter, through all the things that have gone on through this whole experience, my daughter has given birth now to my first grandchild, her first daughter, which is just amazing. And it's been really interesting because people have been saying, well, when are you coming back to Antigua, Janice? And I'm kind of like, well, I don't know. I'm just kind of feeling into every single day. Yet equally, I was very aware, and people have said back to me that when they first met me, specifically in Antigua, I would always say, if something happens with my mum or dad, or when my daughter has a baby, things will change. And the changes have come along with COVID, pandemic, lockdowns, and all those sort of things. And I think something that I found really interesting is the massive reminder that we have a choice. We always have a choice, even if we think we don't have a choice. And sometimes the choices might be shitty, but the choices are still there. And I think that's one thing that came very strongly for me. And then this vibrational portal actually there is no choice, because this is completely intrinsic. This is what's happening regardless. Does that resonate with you in any way?
Absolutely. And what you said about choice is such an important thing, because any time that I suffer life, and let's face it, we all do. I mean, none of us is superhuman. And any time that I'm feeling any suffering in life is when I've fallen for the illusion that I have no choice.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes the choice is so crystal clear that you wouldn't pick anything else, but it is still nevertheless a choice. And and in fact, one of my mentors, Bill Cumming, who runs the Boothby Institute, it's one thing he will always remember. He'll always ask people to remember is to experience in every moment that there is a choice. So yeah, absolutely resonates with me. And as you say, sometimes the choice is so crystal clear, you wouldn't pick anything else.
Absolutely. What about when it's not? So something's just, I was working with a client yesterday morning, and then she sent me a message after, and she said, "Oh man, it's always so good when I speak to you, because after I've spoken to you, I have this injection of energy. Mostly I just feel like I'm not plodding through treacle anymore." And when she said that to me, it sort of resonated with me at several points through yesterday, where I was kind of going, oh, that's a really good analogy, actually. That's a great metaphor, because like if I think about last year at certain points, man, it felt like I was up to my neck in treacle. Yet there was still a part of me that was really fired up and able to do things. So I find that really interesting, the way that you're sort of saying that as well.
Yeah, and sometimes it isn't easy to make the choices. I mean, not going into details, but I'm going to have to make some choices in the near future about one of the practical problems in my life, and I'm not particularly in love with any of the choices that will be available to me. But this is something else that Bill always taught me, is that responsibility isn't about blame. Responsibility is about caring. And the best decision you can make is the one which loves yourself and the people involved in this the most.
Yeah.
But it is fascinating, that choice.
I really liked what you did. I'm just going to say, I really liked what you said, because when you said then about, it's not about blame, it's about ownership, isn't it? It's like, these are my choices. And
well, absolutely.
I have to make them from what is available to me, whether that's thoughts, feelings, whatever. I have to make it on my own ownership. Literally, I have to own it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes people in the professional sphere, in the consulting sphere that I also move in, will use phrases like, whose throat do I choke? And I'm thinking, what a toxic metaphor.
Yeah. Why would you say something like that?
Exactly, but that's just the concept of responsibility that somehow has taken hold. That responsibility is about whose neck is on the line. But Bill always taught me that and in fact the way Bill put it to me is responsibility really means two things. It really means choosing how you want to be and choosing what's the most useful thing to do. That's the start and end of responsibility. Now that's quite profound. It's not to trivialize what responsibility is, but when you realize that there's really only two questions at any point in life, and that is, how do I want to be, and what's the most useful thing to do? That's very liberating, especially if you have learned more toxic metaphors of responsibility, like whose neck is on the block.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you so succinctly broke that down into those two things, it's like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And I think the problems that a lot of people have is they don't have that clarity of thought. They don't necessarily have a pathway of understanding that leads to that clarity. Would you agree?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes, we all have the capacity for that clarity, but sometimes we need somebody to hold our hand and guide us to where that capacity is. Maybe because a lot of people have unintentionally held our hand and led us in the wrong direction, and led us into where things are not so clear, And sometimes I think it is that confusion about responsibility and what responsibility is that makes it hard to make choices. I mean, I remember I was working with somebody one time, and they were agonizing over whether to take redundancy from their job.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a little bit about it, and I just had a moment of intuition, and the question I asked is, well, look, if you were to give this decision to me and I was going to make it for you, what would you want me to choose? And he said, I would want you to make me redundant. I thought, great, well, you seem pretty clear about what you want.
Yeah.
So this had me thinking. An interesting thing is, why is it easy to make the decision when you don't think you're the one responsible for it? And it was exactly that. It's because the decision was made in the context of responsibility equal blame. You know, if I make this choice and it's wrong, it's my fault.
Yeah, I have to own it then.
Exactly. You know, if you make this choice for me and it goes wrong, it's not my fault. And so it was the avoidance of wanting to be at fault that was making the choice hard. And that's one of the reasons I think that you know, if we learn a toxic metaphor of responsibility, it is going to make a lot of choices hard.
Yeah, absolutely. It made me think about change management and stuff like that, and sort of some of the conversations I've had with businesses and things where they want to make changes. And I said, you know, the worst thing that you can try and do is do change to people without getting them on board, because we have to be on board, right, for everything that's going on. And exactly as you also said, sometimes we're on board with the wrong ideas because we haven't necessarily had the right guidance. So in the way that you work then, how do you seek to help people to grow their awareness and to get that kind of gravitas so that they trust themselves, I guess?
Well, it's a very good question. To some extent, it is a little bit bespoke to the person, because obviously you as part of the inquiry, we're looking for, you know, what is this network of beliefs? What is the structure of how you experience this? What I can say is, I think it's incredibly important that somebody has their own experience of something rather than me trying to give you my experience of it, because my experience of it is based on where I was and how I worked. So you know, I do think it's very important to assist people in having an experience which is profound for them. And the best way I know to do it is to patiently and tenaciously inquire, you know, what's going on. And sometimes those clues will just drop out. I mean, to give you an example, when I was speaking to this guy who was agonizing about the redundancy decision, I forget exactly what he said, but just something he said in response to the question that made the penny drop for me. That there was a fear of blame in this, and that's where, you know, I was able to ask the question, which enabled him to have a different experience of this decision that revealed something to him, because the penny also dropped for him. I mean, it dropped for me just before I asked the question. It dropped for him when I asked the question.
Yeah.
Actually, I do know what I want. So why am I struggling to make the decision? Well, because I'm afraid of blame. I'm afraid of getting it wrong.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. It's making me. I was chatting with another client yesterday evening, and I asked a very direct question. You know, can you get? And it was around a job and things that are going on in her life. And I said, can you get another job? And she was like, yeah. And I said, so why are we building all these excuses when actually, instinctively, straight away, you know the answer to the question, but what we do is we get clouded, don't we, and we start to think about it too much, and then when we feel into the fear or the choices and then we build the story that is going to block us, and it's going to block our path. Would you agree with that as well, in different ways?
Yeah. I mean, you know, again, referring to the same example, there was a story. There was a story that built up about about who we are, who we're supposed to be, what we're not supposed to do, what we are supposed to do. You know, part of this particular story was, I mustn't make a decision that could go wrong. You know, I mustn't make a decision that could be economically damaging. and this to me brings up this our whole relationship with the unknown. And in fact, I posted something about it recently, and I know you read it because I noticed you put a like on it. So
Schopenhauer diagonal.
Diagonal, yeah. And there, we must recognize that we're not operating in a vacuum. We're operating in an environment where there's also lots of other things operating as well, and they might not intend to act against us, but they might act against us unintentionally, and the fact of the matter is we have to recognize that it's useful for us to have aims. It's useful for us to invest work in those aims, but it's also important to recognize, though, that we're doing that as one moving part in a system of moving parts which are not necessarily having the same aims as us. Which might, as I mentioned in the post, sometimes they can act in convenient ways to us, sometimes inconvenient, and sometimes downright disruptive. And the fact of the matter is we can't control the rest of the system. Now, we can enter into various forms of delusion about how we're more powerful than the whole of the rest of the system. We can enter into all forms of delusion about how there is probably some magic incantation which puts the rest of the system on my side. But if we put all delusion to one side and just recognize it for what it is, as neither friend nor foe, but just what is, the fact of the matter is that sometimes things are going to go with us, sometimes they're going to go against us, and sometimes they're going to absolutely disrupt us. And what that means is that there is an unknown that we have a relationship with, and we can either have a fearful relationship with that unknown, or an inquisitive relationship with that unknown. Now, a lot of the stories that we tell ourselves are our vain way of trying to make the unknown known. By trying to say, well, look, if this happens, that happens, blah, 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 I'd create the story. And when we create stories about, how we mustn't make decisions, we mustn't make mistakes with our decisions, that is somehow, in some way, an indication of our relationship with the unknown. It's like, well, the best way I know how to deal with the unknown is to not tempt it, to not prod it by making something so bold as a decision. Because again, if I make no decisions, if I have no aims, if I do no work, then and just go along with whatever the unknown presents to me, then at least nothing is my fault. And there's a paradoxical kind of psychological safety that a lot of people find in that idea. And then when people try and develop their relationship with the unknown, sometimes you find people want to go to the polar extremes. They either want to feel like they have absolute control over the unknown, or sometimes they go the other way. It's like, if I can't have 100% control over everything, then I will go for 100% resignation. Whereas actually, maybe what this is really pointing at is the need for a nuanced position where we do the yin and the yang, where we do the thing of we have aims and we do work, and we take control where it makes sense to do so, and at the same time, surrender control when it's clear that that's the best policy. I don't believe in systems which have an absolute be this or be that. I'm much more a fan of the idea of yin and yang, the idea that we actually embrace both opposites in our lives. We just become wiser about when to be one and when to be the other, when to be the one who is asserting my will on the world versus being the one who surrenders my will to the world. It's not that either is absolutely right or absolutely wrong, but each makes sense in their own time.
I think that's a really beautiful description. And when you were saying that, I mean, the way that I see myself is that I'm on this balance place, and I'm either leaning into this thing or I'm peeling back the edges of that one. And it feels like that's what I'm doing all the time. And for me, that's my navigational system. because it's neither one thing or the other. It's kind of, I'll lean over here, I'll feel into that, and then I'll peel back an edge over there and see what that feels like. And I think, you know, you're using words like control, and there are so many people that are stuck in a belief system of having to control everything. And if you're stuck in that space, it's only going to bring you pain and fear and stuff that's not going to work for you, right? Because we just can't control it all.
Exactly. You know, and very often when people seek the assistance of a coach, you know, more often than not, I hate to say anything. I hate to say that anything is always true, because I don't think anything is always true. But a lot of the time, you know, there's a certain sense that when people are seeking some kind of help, it's because maybe they're too much yin and not enough yang, or too much yang and not enough yin. And so sometimes what people need is a little bit of a taste of what isn't their addiction in the way that they manage their lives. I know somebody, for example, who is very addicted to being the forceful person in their lives. And of course, the times that they get distressed is when it would actually be a good time to surrender some of that control. Conversely, I've met people who are dissatisfied with the outcomes in their life, and, you know, guess what? They're a little bit too addicted to the surrender and don't do enough of the, you know, aim and push. You know, and sometimes it's simply that people do have a bit of both, but somehow they've got it the wrong way around about when to do each. You know, sometimes I think about it as simply life is about learning when to be yin and when to be yang.
Yeah, and I would agree, and I think that's a really nice way to put it. I find it really interesting, though, so using language, obviously. So you use the word surrender, and if we say surrender to a whole host of people, their hackles are up, right? Because surrender means the most dreadful thing. How do you help somebody to understand that actually surrender is an okay thing?
Well, again, it's a little bit like responsibility. You know, we think we have a common understanding of the word, and maybe we do at a semantic level, but at an emotional level or at a metaphorical level, we have very different understandings. You know, so in the same way that somebody can come into the conversation where responsibility equals blame, whereas I come into the conversation where responsibility equals choice. Somebody can come into the conversation where surrender is giving up, and others are where the other interpretation is that surrender is, this is time for me to be guided rather than to be the pushy one. You know, and so how do you deal with that? Is expose it. You know, you know, this is my metaphor for responsibility. What's yours? This is my metaphor for surrender. What's yours? Do you have a word that we would prefer to use? You know, if I'm talking about if I'm not talking about giving up, but about recognizing that in this moment it's time for me to be guided rather than to try and control. What word? You know, what's your word for that? Let's use that word.
Because it's so interesting, isn't it, how words you can see sometimes on someone's face. You're like, oh, okay, then that has a massive impact. So we need to find the word that works for you. And it is interesting how all these emotions, all these feels have become attached to this thing that doesn't really exist. It's just a word.
Just a word, absolutely. You know,
right?
Yeah, and what's interesting is I'm going to be very interested to see how language in business changes over the next 20 years or so, because, you know, if you think about it, it's not obvious at first, but somebody pointed out to me, and once they pointed out to me, I thought, gosh, this is so obvious now, is that a lot of business language is based on military metaphors.
Right.
You know, people talk about, you know, strategy, plan of attack. People talk about, you know, even little things like bullet points. You know, and this kind of makes sense because, you know, certainly in the post-war environment, a lot of businesses employed military structures, you know, military command and control structures. And what's happened over the last 40 years is that that's softened. You know, strict hierarchies have broken down. You know, at one point, the idea of how a company worked is that the man at the top, the commanding officer, so to speak, gave orders to his subordinates, who gave orders to their subordinates. And that's how the business actually operated. Whereas, of course, right now, the opposite of that is what's in favor, which is, the guys who actually write the software know what we need to do. So they tell their supervisors, this is how we need to do this, who tell their supervisors, this is how we need to do this.
It goes up the chain.
Exactly, goes up the chain. And of course, our culture is changing in the sense that whereas once we might have thought military metaphors were strong and military metaphors were bold, now we have different sensibilities around these things. So I think a lot of the metaphors that we attach to words that we use are going to shift. I think responsibility is only one example of where we probably consensually had a blame-oriented notion of responsibility when the structure of our businesses were essentially military command and control structures. Now, I dare say we will see much more of a shift towards understanding responsibility as choice. But yeah, I'm going to be fascinated to see how the language of business changes, because I think we've been in this turning point in business for probably about the last 10 years, and there's probably another 10 years to go, where we're seeing this complete shift from the hierarchical top-down organization which used military metaphors, perhaps because we tended to put military officers in these senior positions, to this more bottom-up structure, where we leverage the wisdom of the people who do the work, and that those people are now coming from generations which don't love those military metaphors.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? It's like that rigid structure has actually proven to not be necessarily the strength that we thought it was. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, in a command and control structure, everybody is basically just hands for the one brain at the top.
Yeah.
Everybody is an agent of that one thought. And there's a brilliant video on YouTube, and I sometimes use this video when I teach scaled agile framework courses, which is something else that I do. Okay. And it's a submarine commander video where basically on his nuclear submarine, he turned it around. He said, instead of me doing all the thinking and telling you what to do, I ask you what we should do, and I'll tell you if it's okay.
Okay.
And cool. It's a fascinating video about how he did this, and he turned that nuclear submarine into the best run submarine in the fleet by turning it round to, you tell me what we should do, and I'll tell you if it's okay.
It's an interesting idea for lots of people to take on board, isn't it? And how you would feel to actually do that. I mean, if we look at the way the world has changed, and now we've got so many people working from home, we've got businesses saying, they're not necessarily going to open, or you only have to come into an office 2 days a week and you can stay at home at, 3 days a week, whatever. How do you think people are being impacted by that? I mean, because I know, you said you work from home. I've been used to working the way that I work for like many, many, many years. So to a degree, there's no difference, right? I'm still freestyling. I'm still filling my diary the way that I want to do it and working the way that I want to. And interesting, you talk about the military. So my brother was in the Navy for way too long, from sort of 18 through till 50, I think 52 or something. He's been out for 3 years. And he's doing pretty much exactly the same high caliber job that he was doing, working for the MOD, but in places like Boeing, etc. He's been working from home. Oh my God, man, has he struggled. Not only has he struggled with the home working, we obviously then had the death of our father and COVID, etc. But it was really, really interesting because he's obviously come from a very different background. which was military, super supportive in many ways, but again, the military model, work hard, play hard, so lots of great stuff in there as well, to all of a sudden sitting at home, being disconnected from people, doing a job that is kind of the same but different. And it's been a real struggle for him. And he's not the kind of person that normally, he's not a struggler. That's not who he is. And I've had many, many conversations with him about, oh, you should think about this and you should ask them that, etc. What's been your experience, and what is your experience, do you think, going forward, of how the world is going to change in that context, with so many people now having these choices and some of them being okay with it and some of them not being given the choice? Actually, you can have your job, but you need to stay home and do it.
Yes, it's interesting, because on the macro level, there's a lot of good things about people working more from home, like less cars on the road, less fuel consumption, less congestion on the roads, less need for roads. We as a world, we have become far too dependent on burning fuel and building roads and things like that. Now, to be fair, the way that we were working prior to all this networking technology, that there wasn't really a lot of choice. So it's, on a macro level, I can see a lot of good things. On a personal level, though, it's a very mixed thing. There are bonuses and there are demerits. When I did contracts in London, for example, when I was living in Maidstone, I would have to get up at 5:30 in the morning to get the train, to go to work, to do the work, probably finish about 6 o'clock, probably 9 o'clock by the time I got home. So, in reality, it was a 5:30 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night existence. Not a lot of time really for personal things in that.
No.
But on the other hand, it was brilliant to be in the workplace with other workers, to be able to collaborate, to be able to look them in the eye, to be able to have informal chats, to be able to be working on something and say, do you know what, I'm having a really shitty experience about something. Hey, let's go get a coffee. That stuff organically happens.
Absolutely. I've got to pull on that bit, because that was one of the things that I'd said to my brother was a massive thing. And I think at one point he actually changed his job sort of the middle of last summer or something, or maybe October, something like that. And he's not met in person any of the people that he's working with. He's working in isolation. He's not in an office where he grabs a coffee at the coffee machine or whatever it is. And exactly as you say, there's some kind of interaction, whether it be about the work that you're doing or whatever, there's this interaction. And there's all these normal bits that we've gotten used to having that fill in pockets of, oh, I'm not sure about this, or the way you feel about something. All of that is missing.
Yeah, it is. And it is that informal, organic communication. As you know yourself, communication isn't just when you write somebody an email or phone or have a conversation by phone. There's so many other aspects to human communication, and I personally believe that we are psychologically hardwired to need to commune with one another. I think this is why our anxieties tend to be at their greatest when we're isolated, and our comfort tends to be at its greatest when we're communing. I think we're hardwired to do that. And the workplace is one of the places that we commune. Now, personally, I would love a working pattern, which I actually did have when I worked at IBM a while ago, where every other day I worked at home, and every day in between I went into the office. And what that meant is that so 1 week it would be Monday, Wednesday, Friday from home, Tuesday, Thursday in the office. The next week it'd be Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the office, and Tuesday and Thursday at home. But what it meant is that, if I was getting up at 5:30 in the morning to go to London, I hadn't only got home at 9 o'clock the previous night.
Yeah.
So and if I did get home at 9 o'clock the previous night, I could actually lay in a little bit on the next day before I started work. And so I loved how that reduced my commuting. I loved how it reduced all those wasted hours of commuting. But and let's face it, sometimes, especially if you are a bit introverted, as I am, sometimes you do your best work when you're left alone to do it.
Yeah.
but you still need that informal, multimodal ability to communicate with people, to figure things out, to understand things, to be able to commune with people.
Absolutely.
Now, some companies will go all the way back into the office and make everybody commute again. Some companies will keep everybody at home. Some companies will give people a choice. Some people will implement a hybrid model or permit a hybrid model. I would certainly go for a hybrid model if where I have the choice. Where people don't have the choice and must work from home, as we all had to do through the lockdown, the best thing I can encourage people to do is to mitigate for that lack of communion by simply picking up the phone frequently. For some reason, we've got it into our heads that when it comes to work, we must have a reason to communicate with somebody. And I think
we don't talk anymore, right?
Exactly. It's like, it's like, what's my reason for calling this person? Maybe you don't need one.
Yeah.
Or maybe you don't need a business reason. Maybe the reason is simply that in order for us to feel comfortable, to get clear about things, we need to commune. So, where people are working at home all the time, I would simply say, just pick up the phone on a regular basis. You don't have to have a reason. You don't have to have a business reason. Just bring somebody and say, hey, how's it going for you? What are you working on at the moment? How are you finding it? Sometimes people won't have the time to talk and they'll tell you, and you bring them another time.
I think that's really important, and it's made me think about another client of mine who works in housing estates that are being built and shared ownership and all that kind of stuff. And she actually had mentioned that she's, there's this one guy who she says literally, she's never met him in person, but she said he got me through lockdown, he got me through everything. And he's, she's happily married and everything, but this guy, I think he deals maybe in mortgages or finances or something. He's the other end of the country. She would speak to him nearly every day for work stuff. And then they actually got to this point where they spoke every day just so that they had human interaction. And then she said it took her maybe 6 months to realise that they were speaking every day, and it was just making them feel a little bit better about what they were going through. And it was that recognition of, I'm just talking to somebody. We're not talking about the work stuff. We're just saying, hey, how you doing? Getting to know each other, but feeling that communion, that connection.
Exactly. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I'm loving talking to you like this, because it's great to do so. I mean, later today, I've got somebody coming to the house who needs to look at something for us, and after that, I will probably be ringing up one of my mates because I'll probably want to talk about it with them.
Yeah.
It's I mean, communing with other human beings is ultra therapeutic.
Absolutely. One of the things I'll share, and it's nothing to do with work or anything, the loss of my father. So I was here at home. I'd come home specifically just ahead of the lockdown because we thought something was going on, and whatever happened. And one of the things that I really kept saying to my mum after was, the problem is, Mum, you're not getting to tell your story. You're not getting the opportunity to go out. So my dad died March the 25th, the day that we literally went into the whole lockdown. It all started. And then for months and months and months, we actually bumped into somebody 2 weeks ago in town that used to live in the village. And the first thing he said to my mum was, how's John? And it was like my mum was hit with a sledgehammer. And it's still the case that she's not seeing people that she's gotten used to, that she would have been seeing all the time, to tell her story. And I just kept saying to her, it's really difficult because you're just not getting to commune. You're not getting on the bus. You're not going to town. You're not doing all of these things. So I think, for me, it was a massive thing of, again, this isolation, this loneliness, this not going down to the local shop and buying a newspaper or seeing people. We've missed out on huge chunks of how things have become in our lives and the way that we would normally share them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was, thinking about that thing now, that I can see this guy asking mum, and there's tears in my eyes, because there's a part of me that thinks, yeah, we just didn't do that. So how can we create the connections that we need? I mean, I believe that the human condition is to seek connection. And I'm very like you. I would say I'm an introvert extrovert, because it's very much on my terms. When I'm out. But mostly I'm like, yeah, I'm in and I'm over here, and I'll organise all these things, but I kind of want to be over here on the backside of it. But I massively need my people that I can connect to, that I can share with. And if I didn't have those, life would not be so good. So I think, we all have to seek to find the people that are our circle that we can share with, and to make sure that we continue to do that. And especially through the coming times, because it's, times are changing and things are moving towards whatever they're moving towards, but things are very different, right?
Yeah, they are. And that communion is the thing that we need to find our own way of creating. I mean, we've both talked about, being something of an introvert, and I think that's something that's easily misunderstood, because for me the real difference between being introverted and extroverted is simply the role of being alone in your own personal renewal. But it doesn't mean to say that you don't want the connections. It doesn't mean to say
that we don't do people. We do people, but we do it on our terms, the way that we understand it works for us, I think, isn't it?
Exactly. Because when I'm dealing with anything which is what I would call outer world stressful, in other words, it's not necessarily making me upset on the inside, but it is nevertheless a difficult outer world problem to navigate. Then I find that the way I personally need to deal with that is a combination of time to myself to process, quiet and whatever, and connecting with people and communing with them. It is a combination of both, and I think it's that way for a lot of people.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that and leading into that. I'm just looking at the time, we've been talking for nearly an hour already, which is amazing. But I just want to share something with you. I was talking to a really great friend of mine in Antigua yesterday evening, and she calls herself the HR rule breaker, and she's very maverick in the way that she deals with HR and coaching styles. And she'd been working on a paper with a friend, and we were just chatting things. And she said, yeah, we've come up with this thing. It's fragile to agile, Janice. And you know what? It really, really resonated with me. And she's like, I had to tell you because I knew it would. And I said, yeah, but that kind of feels like exactly where we all are in a certain way. We've been through this fragile stage, and now we've got to flex and turn agile across the board in everything that we're doing. And it is almost that, dare we call it behavioral flexibility, whatever, but I just thought, yeah, fragile to agile, that's great. I think, write a book on that now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does it resonate with you as well?
Yeah, it's a great set of words, isn't it? Fragile to agile. I love it, because let's face it, again, yin and yang, our lives are a combination of strength and weakness. Our lives are a combination of pushing and letting go. Our lives are a combination of feeling powerful and feeling weak. And you mentioned about being like the balance and leaning one way and leaning the other. I'm reminded of a quote from the guy who created Aikido, where some student says to the guy, he says, how come you're always in balance? And his answer is, I'm never in balance, but I'm always correcting it. And sometimes I feel a little bit like that. And to some extent, our emotions are what tell us we need to make a shift. And yeah, sometimes we are fragile.
Yeah.
We all are. I mean, one of the things that I'm very insistent upon is that we're all human at the core. Sometimes I think there's a toxic end to the personal development spectrum, which tells people they have to be more than human. And and they start getting into this cycle of wanting unsustainable experiences of life. And I think we need to embrace our humanity, and part of embracing our humanity means, we sometimes are leaning more towards the agile, and sometimes we're leaning more towards the fragile. And when we feel that we're leaning more towards the fragile, that's when it's good to remember, hey, fragile to agile, let's move in this direction.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was yesterday morning, I was sorting something out in an understairs cupboard for my mum, and I saw that there was a box in the back that my dad had probably put there however many years ago with old Hoover parts. And I was like, they need to go. I've just bought her a new Shark. Do you know what I mean? Mm. And I pulled this box out, and there was a pair of overalls from my dad, and they were sat on the top. And I was like, I picked them up and I smelt them, and I was like, oh my God, it smells like Dad. And of course it didn't. That is, whole psychological thing. And I found myself having a cry, and it was really, really therapeutic. And I wouldn't even say I was necessarily really sad. I was kind of saying to myself, oh gosh, I miss you, Dad. Do you know what I mean? But I was okay with it. And then I was reflecting on it when I was talking to Nikki last night, and I said, it just felt really good. I said, and there was no, oh my God, or, oh, it was just, it is what it is. And it was exactly finding that balance and it being okay to be that human in that moment, and then move on to whatever came next.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we need to flush it all out, don't we? Sometimes we just need to flush it all out, and that's what that's what tears do for us. They're an emotional flush.
Absolutely, it's been an awesome conversation. Thank you. I think we'll have to have another one in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to, Janice.
That would be awesome. Thanks ever so much for spending time with us. If people want to find you, I'm going to ask you to send us your details, and then we'll put them below the podcast and everything so they can check you out. But have a wonderful day. I hope the sun shines a bit more on you through that window.
It's shining right now, as you can probably tell.
It is, absolutely. I was like, keep it coming. It must feel lovely. It's that October sunshine feels really good, doesn't it?
It does.
Awesome. Thank you ever so much for joining me.
Thanks, Janice.
Thanks. Have a great rest of the day.
Cheers.